In hindsight, the signs had been there for months, if not years. But hindsight is a luxury you don't have in the moment. My wife, Claire, had always been the center of my world. We had built a life together over a decade, each brick laid with shared laughter, challenges, and compromises. If you had asked me 6 months ago, I would have said we were the perfect team. Today, I'm not so sure. It began innocuously enough. Claire's work schedule became erratic. She'd always been ambitious in her career as an interior designer, but her recent projects seemed to demand an unprecedented level of secrecy. She talked about high-profile clients who insisted on discretion, which meant late nights, weekend meetings, and sudden out-of-town trips. I trusted her, or at least I wanted to. Trust was the foundation of our relationship, wasn't it? One Friday evening, she came home unusually late. Her excuse was plausible, as it often was. A last-minute client meeting, a delayed train. But there was a subtle change in her demeanor. She seemed distracted. Her responses to my questions clipped, her laughter at my jokes forced. It was like she was present in body but not in spirit. That night, as she showered, I found myself staring at her phone on the kitchen counter. It buzzed twice, the screen lighting up with a message. My instinct told me not to look, but curiosity can be a corrosive force. The message was from someone named E. The content was innocuous enough. Tonight was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. A casual observer might have interpreted it as a note from a client. Perhaps a project had gone well. But something about the phrasing, the familiarity, unsettled me. I placed the phone back where I found it and pretended to be absorbed in my book when Claire returned to the living room. She sat beside me, her damp hair brushing my shoulder, and I felt a wave of unease wash over me. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing patterns. Claire's phone, once left carelessly on the coffee table or bedside stand, was now always with her. It was either in her hand or pocket, the screen turned away when she set it down. Her once warm conversations with me grew perfunctory, as though she was fulfilling an obligation rather than engaging out of desire. And the late nights continued. There were always plausible explanations, but the excuses began to pile up like autumn leaves, beautiful in isolation but overwhelming when seen together. One evening, I decided to confront her indirectly. I asked about her projects, her clients, her workload. She answered with her usual charm, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. But beneath her words, I sensed a rehearsed quality. It was as though she had prepared for this, anticipating my questions and arming herself with disarming responses. Her deflections were masterful, and I began to doubt myself. Was I being paranoid? Was my insecurity coloring my perception of an innocent situation? The turning point came on an otherwise unremarkable Saturday afternoon. Claire had gone out to run errands, leaving me alone with time to think. Too much time. I decided to clean the house, hoping the activity would distract me from the growing knot in my stomach. As I organized her office, I came across a folder tucked away in the back of a drawer. Inside were blueprints for a project she had mentioned weeks ago, along with receipts, sketches, and notes. At first, it seemed mundane, but one receipt caught my eye. It was for a hotel in the city, dated 2 weeks prior. Claire had told me she'd been meeting with a client at their residence that evening. The hotel was in a different part of town entirely. My mind raced as I tried to reconcile the discrepancy. Why would she have been at a hotel if her meeting was at a client's home? The implications were devastating. I copied the receipt, slipping it into my wallet before replacing the folder exactly as I'd found it. My hands shook as I closed the drawer, the weight of my discovery pressing down on me. I tried to rationalize it, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But the seed of suspicion had been planted, and it was already taking root. I began to monitor Claire more closely. Felt wrong, invasive even, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply amiss. I noted her comings and goings, her phone habits, her interactions with me. Every smile she gave, every kiss she placed on my cheek, felt like it carried a hidden meaning, a duality I couldn't decipher. One evening, while she was in the shower, I took the chance to check her phone again. This time, I found messages from E that left no room for doubt. They spoke in code, their words laced with double meanings and inside jokes. One message referenced a meeting at the same hotel on the receipt I'd found. My stomach churned as I pieced together the fragments of their communication. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was betrayal. But who was E? Their messages gave little away, no last name, no clear identifying details. The anonymity was maddening. I resolved to find out who they were and what role they played in Claire's life. I needed to know the extent of her deception before deciding what to do next. The following week, Claire mentioned another late meeting. Her explanation was as plausible as ever, her tone so convincing that I almost doubted my own suspicions. Almost. As she left the house, I waited 10 minutes before grabbing my keys and following her. She drove into the city, her car weaving through traffic with practiced ease. I kept a safe distance, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. My heart raced as she pulled into the parking lot of the same hotel listed on the receipt. I parked nearby and watched as she entered the building, her phone pressed to her ear. Minutes passed like hours. The neon sign of the hotel cast a garish glow on the pavement, the buzz of passing cars a constant backdrop to my thoughts. Finally, I saw her emerge, her expression unreadable. She was accompanied by a man. He was tall, sharply dressed, and unfamiliar. They spoke briefly before he handed her a folder. She smiled, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in months. They parted ways and she returned to her car. I stayed frozen in my seat, torn between the urge to confront her and the need to process what I'd seen. The man's identity was a mystery, but his connection to Claire was undeniable. As I watched her car disappear into the night, I realized that this was only the beginning. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and I was determined to find it. The following days after seeing Claire at the hotel were a blur of suspicion and self-doubt. Every interaction with her felt strained, like we were playing roles in a drama where neither of us knew the script. I found myself obsessively replaying that night in my head. Her calm demeanor, the man's easy confidence, the brief exchange that seemed so mundane yet so damning. What was in that folder? Who was he? And what was Claire hiding? The need for answers consumed me. I decided that if Claire wasn't going to tell me the truth, I would find it myself. My opportunity came sooner than I expected. Claire had left for another one of her late-night meetings, her departure accompanied by the usual litany of plausible excuses. Once she was gone, I went to her office and began searching. It felt invasive, wrong even, but the fear of what I might find outweighed the guilt of looking. After rummaging through drawers and rifling through files, I found it. The folder. It was tucked away in the bottom drawer of her desk, hidden beneath a stack of old invoices. My hands trembled as I opened it, bracing myself for whatever truths lay inside. The contents were underwhelming at first glance. A series of architectural sketches, client contracts, and project timelines. But as I flipped through the pages, a name caught my eye. It was the same name I had seen on her phone messages. Ethan. His name appeared repeatedly in the contracts, listed as a partner on multiple projects. The documents indicated a level of collaboration far deeper than Claire had ever mentioned. My stomach twisted as I read on. One contract stood out from the rest. It was marked as confidential, its terms vague but lucrative. Ethan's signature was bold and deliberate, next to Claire's. The date was recent, aligning with the night I had followed her to the hotel. The discovery left me reeling. This wasn't just an affair. It was a partnership, professional and possibly personal. The lines between the two blurred in ways that made my head spin. I copied the contents of the folder, photographing every page before returning it to its place. If Claire wasn't going to tell me the truth, I would confront her with the evidence. When Claire returned home that night, I was ready. She walked in with the same practiced smile, her tone casual as she asked about my day. I watched her closely, searching for any sign of guilt or hesitation. She was good, too good. Her composure only deepened my suspicion. I started by asking about her projects, steering the conversation toward Ethan. Her reaction was subtle but telling. A brief pause, a flicker of discomfort in her eyes before she recovered. She described him as a colleague, someone she'd been working with on a few high-profile projects. Her tone was measured, her words carefully chosen. When I pressed further, mentioning the folder and the hotel, her demeanor shifted. The mask slipped for a moment, revealing something raw and unguarded. She accused me of invading her privacy, deflecting my questions with indignation. But her anger felt performative, a shield to protect whatever she was hiding. I realized I wasn't going to get the truth from her, not willingly. If I wanted answers, I would have to find them myself. The next day, I decided to dig deeper into Ethan. His name, now etched into my mind, became the focal point of my investigation. I started with a simple online search, combing through social media profiles, company websites, and news articles. What I found painted a picture of a man who was as enigmatic as he was accomplished. Ethan was an architect, renowned for his innovative designs and high-profile clientele. His social media presence was curated to perfection, filled with polished photos of his projects and carefully crafted captions. But there were gaps, conspicuous absences that hinted at a life lived just out of public view. I found no mention of Claire in his posts, but their professional connection was evident. They had collaborated on several projects, their names frequently appearing together in press releases and industry publications. The partnership seemed professional on the surface, but my instincts told me there was more to the story. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to confront Ethan directly. It was a risky move, but the need for answers outweighed my apprehension. I found his office address online and paid him a visit under the guise of seeking architectural advice. Ethan's office was as sleek and modern as I had imagined, a reflection of his professional persona. He greeted me warmly, his charm disarming. As we spoke, I studied him, searching for any sign of duplicity. He was smooth, his words measured and deliberate, but there was an edge to his demeanor, a guardedness that set me on edge. When I mentioned Claire's name, his reaction was subtle but telling. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his posture stiffening ever so slightly. He recovered quickly, speaking of her in glowing terms as a talented designer and valued collaborator. But his words felt rehearsed, like he was reciting a script. As I left his office, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was hiding something. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was still incomplete. A week later, I got my chance to dig deeper. Claire had gone out for another late-night meeting, leaving her laptop unattended. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, my heart pounding as I navigated through her files. In her email inbox, I found a chain of messages between her and Ethan. Their tone was professional at first, discussing project details and deadlines. But as I scrolled further, the nature of their correspondence shifted. Their messages became more personal, laced with inside jokes and playful banter. One email stood out from the rest. "I'll always cherish the time we spent together. Can't wait for our next escape." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. There was no longer any doubt. Claire and Ethan's relationship went far beyond professional collaboration. They had shared something intimate, something that betrayed everything we had built together. The discovery left me reeling, but it also gave me clarity. I couldn't confront Claire directly, not yet. I needed to understand the full scope of her betrayal, to uncover the truth about her relationship with Ethan and the secrets she was keeping. I decided to follow her the next time she went out, determined to see for myself what she was hiding. My heart was heavy, my mind racing with possibilities. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew one thing for certain. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and I was ready to face it no matter the cost. The night I followed Claire again, the air felt heavier than usual. There was a sense of finality to it, as though the culmination of months of doubt and suspicion was drawing closer. She left the house at her usual time, dressed impeccably, her smile as convincing as ever. I watched from the shadows, my heart pounding as I slipped into my car and trailed her at a safe distance. This time, Claire didn't go to the hotel. Instead, she drove to an upscale restaurant in the city, the kind of place we used to frequent on anniversaries. She parked, exited the car, and walked inside with a confidence that made my chest ache. I waited, my pulse hammering in my ears. Minutes later, Ethan appeared. He was just as polished as before, his presence commanding attention as he strode toward the entrance. Watching them meet confirmed my worst fears. They greeted each other with an embrace that lingered just a second too long, their smiles too intimate for colleagues. I stayed in the car, watching through the windshield as they took a corner booth near the window. Their body language spoke volumes. Ethan leaned in as Claire laughed, her hand brushing his arm. Their conversation seemed lively, animated, punctuated by smiles and occasional glances around the room. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal, the weight of their actions pressing down on me. A waiter approached, delivering a bottle of wine. They toasted, their glasses catching the dim light of the restaurant. It was a scene straight out of a romance movie, but I was the audience to a play where I should have been the lead. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? What did Ethan offer that I couldn't? And why had Claire let it come to this? I took out my phone and snapped a few photos. They weren't perfect, but they were enough to capture the essence of the moment. Claire's betrayal immortalized in pixels. As much as it hurt to see her like this, I knew I needed proof. The time for doubt was over. I needed to confront her with undeniable evidence. That night, Claire returned home later than usual. Her expression was serene, as though she'd had a pleasant evening with no shadow of guilt darkening her mood. I sat in the living room, the photos on my phone burning a hole in my pocket. When she walked in, she greeted me casually, her tone light. I didn't respond. Instead, I placed my phone on the coffee table. The screen lit up with the images of her and Ethan at the restaurant. Claire's smile faltered as she glanced at the photos. Her face paled, her carefully constructed mask slipping as the weight of the evidence hit her. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of anger or denial, she looked at me with a mix of sadness and resignation. She sat down across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the photos. The silence between us was deafening, every second stretching into an eternity. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, measured, as she admitted to the affair. She didn't offer excuses, nor did she try to downplay the gravity of her actions. Instead, she painted a picture of a woman who had felt lost, unmoored from the life she had built. She described Ethan as someone who had reignited a spark in her, someone who made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her words cut deep, but they also revealed a truth I hadn't been prepared for. Claire's betrayal wasn't just about Ethan. It was about us. Somewhere along the way, our connection had frayed, our partnership eroded by time and complacency. Her affair was both a symptom and a cause of a larger problem, one that neither of us had addressed until it was too late. As Claire's confession unfolded, she revealed more about Ethan. He wasn't just a fling or a passing fancy. Their relationship had started innocently, built on shared projects and late-night brainstorming sessions. Over time, it had deepened, fueled by mutual admiration and the thrill of the forbidden. But even as she spoke of their connection, there was an undercurrent of doubt in her voice. Claire admitted that Ethan had his own agenda. He wasn't just a partner in her professional life. He had used their relationship to gain leverage over her. He had pushed her into taking risks, signing contracts that benefited him more than her, and jeopardizing her career in the process. What had started as a spark of excitement had become a web of manipulation and control. Her words painted a picture of a woman who had been swept up in something larger than herself, unable to see the consequences until it was too late. It was a bitter irony. The man who had made her feel alive again had also exploited her vulnerability. Claire's confession was only the beginning. Over the next few days, as we pieced together the fragments of her relationship with Ethan, a darker picture began to emerge. The contracts I had found in her office were part of a larger scheme. Ethan had been using Claire's reputation and connections to secure deals for his own company, funneling money into questionable projects and skimming profits along the way. The deeper we dug, the more we uncovered. Ethan's charm and success were a facade, hiding a man who thrived on manipulation and deceit. He had left a trail of broken partnerships and legal disputes in his wake. His name whispered in industry circles as someone to watch but never trust. Claire, caught in his orbit, had become both an accomplice and a victim. Her actions had been driven by a mix of attraction, desperation, and fear, leaving her entangled in a situation she couldn't escape. As much as I wanted to hate her, I couldn't ignore the pain in her eyes, the regret that seemed to consume her with every word she spoke. With the truth laid bare, Claire and I faced a choice. We could try to move on, burying the past and pretending it never happened. Or we could take action, exposing Ethan for who he truly was. The latter was risky, but it was also the only way to reclaim some semblance of control over our lives. We decided to gather evidence against Ethan, documenting his schemes and compiling a dossier that left no room for doubt. Claire reached out to former colleagues who had also been burned by him, their stories adding weight to our case. It was a painstaking process, but it gave us a sense of purpose, a way to channel our pain into something productive. As we worked together, I felt a flicker of the connection we had once shared. It wasn't enough to erase the betrayal, but it was a reminder of what we had lost, and what we might still salvage. The decision to expose Ethan was not made lightly. Claire and I both knew the risks. He was a man accustomed to operating in the shadows, his charm masking a ruthless cunning. But the weight of what he had done to her, to us, made inaction impossible. As much as I despised the betrayal, the more I uncovered about Ethan's manipulations, the more I realized Claire had been a pawn in his game. That realization fueled a new sense of purpose, to dismantle his carefully constructed empire and ensure he couldn't do this to anyone else. Our first step was to compile every shred of evidence we had against him. Claire's access to their shared projects proved invaluable. Contracts with inflated budgets, emails filled with subtle coercion, and financial discrepancies all painted a damning picture. Every late-night meeting, every whispered promise, every confidential deal had left behind a digital footprint. Piece by piece, we built a dossier that revealed the scope of Ethan's deceit. But it wasn't just about money. Ethan had manipulated Claire emotionally, isolating her from her support system and exploiting her vulnerabilities. As painful as it was for her to revisit those memories, she recognized the importance of documenting them. Her testimony would be key in showing the full extent of his manipulations. Eric's involvement was instrumental. With his tech skills, he helped us trace the flow of money from Ethan's projects to offshore accounts, uncovering the layers of obfuscation he had built around his schemes. Eric's determination to help, despite the personal toll it took on him, was a reminder that not all connections in our lives were fraught with betrayal. Once we had our evidence, we needed a way to confront Ethan without putting ourselves in danger. Claire suggested leveraging his ego. He thrived on control and hated being blindsided. If we could get him to lower his guard, we might have a chance to expose him publicly. We arranged a meeting under the guise of discussing a new project. Claire's message to him was carefully crafted, playing to his vanity and emphasizing the potential for substantial profits. Ethan's response was immediate and enthusiastic. He proposed a meeting at a high-end lounge, a place where he felt comfortable and in control. The night of the meeting, I sat in a car parked nearby, watching as Claire walked into the lounge. She carried herself with a confidence I hadn't seen in months, her determination shining through the cracks in her composure. She wore a wire, the recording device hidden beneath her blouse, its signal transmitting to my phone and Eric's laptop. We had backups upon backups, ensuring that no matter what happened, we would have the evidence we needed. Inside the lounge, Claire and Ethan sat at a secluded table, their conversation beginning with pleasantries and small talk. I listened intently as Claire steered the discussion toward their past projects. Her voice was steady, her questions probing yet subtle. Ethan, ever the narcissist, took the bait, speaking freely about their successes and downplaying any mention of irregularities. As the conversation progressed, Claire shifted gears. She brought up the contracts Ethan had pressured her into signing, framing her questions as concerns about potential legal ramifications. Ethan's tone changed, his confidence faltering as he tried to dismiss her concerns. But Claire persisted, her questions growing sharper, her tone more assertive. Finally, she dropped the pretense. She confronted him about the offshore accounts, the inflated budgets, and the emotional manipulation he had subjected her to. The lounge's ambient noise couldn't mask the tension that filled the space. Ethan's initial reaction was one of disbelief, followed by anger. He accused her of betrayal, his voice rising as he tried to regain control of the situation. But Claire didn't back down. She presented the evidence we had gathered, laying it out piece by piece. Ethan's bravado cracked under the weight of her words, his protests growing weaker with each revelation. By the time she mentioned the wire and the authorities, his expression was one of pure panic. The aftermath of the confrontation unfolded quickly. Eric had alerted law enforcement to the meeting, and officers arrived just as Claire walked out of the lounge. Ethan's attempts to leave were thwarted, his protests drowned out by the reading of his rights. Watching from the car, I felt a surge of relief mixed with a lingering sadness. This chapter of our lives was coming to an end, but the scars it left would take time to heal. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's network unraveled. The evidence we provided led to a cascade of arrests and investigations, exposing the breadth of his operations. Former partners came forward with their own stories, adding to the mounting case against him. The media latched onto the story, painting Ethan as a charismatic con artist brought down by his own hubris. Claire's role in exposing him earned her both praise and scrutiny. While some saw her as a victim who had found the strength to fight back, others questioned her complicity in his schemes. She faced tough questions from reporters and investigators, her every word scrutinized. But through it all, she remained resolute, her focus on making amends for her mistakes. For Claire and me, the road to healing was long and uncertain. The trust that had once defined our relationship was shattered, replaced by a fragile truce built on shared pain and a desire to move forward. We sought therapy, both individually and together, confronting the wounds that Ethan had exploited and the fractures in our marriage that had allowed him to wedge his way in. As difficult as it was, the process brought moments of clarity and connection. We began to rediscover the parts of ourselves and our relationship that had been overshadowed by doubt and betrayal. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation, but it was a start. Months after Ethan's arrest, Claire received a letter from one of his former associates. The letter revealed a startling truth. Ethan had orchestrated their initial partnership with Claire not because of her talent or reputation, but because of me. He had learned about my position at a prominent firm and had seen an opportunity to leverage Claire's connection to gain access to my network. The revelation was a punch to the gut. Ethan's betrayal had been more calculated and insidious than I had imagined. He hadn't just targeted Claire, he had targeted us. It was a sobering reminder of how deeply he had manipulated our lives, weaving a web of deceit that extended far beyond the surface. The discovery brought a new layer of complexity to our healing process. It forced us to confront not just what had happened, but why it had happened. It was a painful but necessary step in understanding the full scope of Ethan's impact and reclaiming our lives from his shadow. In the aftermath of Ethan's exposure and arrest, the whirlwind of emotions that followed felt almost surreal. For months, our lives had been dominated by his shadow, his manipulations, and the betrayals he had orchestrated. With him out of the picture, it was as though a weight had been lifted, but the scars he left behind remained raw and unhealed. Claire and I were left standing amidst the rubble, unsure of what could be salvaged and what had to be let go. The months following Ethan's arrest were a haze of legal proceedings and media scrutiny. Claire was called to testify multiple times, her role as both victim and accomplice scrutinized under a harsh spotlight. She answered every question honestly, her voice steady even as the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Watching her on the stand, I felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. She was owning her mistakes, facing her demons head-on, but the cost of her choices was evident in every line etched into her face. The public's perception of Claire was divided. Some saw her as a hero who had played a pivotal role in taking down a dangerous manipulator. Others viewed her as complicit, someone who had enabled Ethan until it no longer suited her. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between. She had been both deceived and complicit, manipulated and willing, and she was determined to make amends. For me, the legal proceedings were an exercise in restraint. My anger toward Ethan had burned brightly, but his arrest and subsequent downfall felt like a hollow victory. The damage he had done, to Claire, to our marriage, to my sense of security, couldn't be undone by a prison sentence. And yet, watching him face justice brought a measure of closure. He could no longer wield his charm and cunning to destroy lives. Claire and I continued therapy, both individually and together. The sessions were grueling, forcing us to confront the cracks in our relationship that had allowed Ethan to exploit us. We talked about the distance that had grown between us over the years, the unspoken resentments, and the ways we had failed to support each other. It was painful work, but it was also necessary. One breakthrough came during a session where Claire admitted to the fear that had driven her decisions. She spoke of feeling invisible in our marriage, of longing for validation and excitement that she no longer found in our daily lives. Her words were difficult to hear, but they also illuminated the path forward. We couldn't change the past, but we could learn from it. We could choose to see each other again, to prioritize the connection we had once taken for granted. Our reconciliation was slow and tentative. Trust, once broken, is not easily rebuilt. But as the weeks turned into months, we found moments of connection that reminded us of why we had chosen each other in the first place. A shared laugh over an old joke, a quiet evening watching a movie, a walk through the park where we held hands for the first time in years. These moments were small, but they were enough to keep us moving forward. Just as we began to find our footing, another twist emerged, one that changed the narrative yet again. I received a call from an investigator who had been working on Ethan's case. He wanted to share new information, something he felt I deserved to know. The investigator revealed that Ethan's obsession with Claire had begun long before they worked together. He had researched her extensively, learning about her career, her aspirations, and even her personal life. His partnership with her wasn't a coincidence. It was calculated, and his interest in her wasn't limited to her professional talents. He had seen her as a gateway to me, to my connections, and to the stability he craved but could never achieve on his own. The revelation left me reeling. Ethan's manipulation of Claire had been deeper and more insidious than we had realized. He had woven himself into our lives with surgical precision, exploiting every vulnerability he could find. It was a sobering reminder of how easily trust could be weaponized. Armed with this new understanding, Claire and I recommitted to moving forward. We couldn't change what had happened, but we could choose how to respond. The trauma Ethan had inflicted would not define us. We would not let him have that power. Claire took steps to rebuild her career, distancing herself from the projects she had worked on with Ethan and forging new partnerships based on transparency and integrity. Her reputation, though tarnished, began to recover as she proved herself capable of standing on her own. Watching her regain her confidence was both heartening and bittersweet. She was stronger now, but the journey had come at a cost. As for me, I focused on rediscovering the parts of myself that had been overshadowed by the chaos. I reconnected with old friends, pursued hobbies I had neglected, and found solace in the quiet moments that life offered. I learned to let go of the anger that had consumed me, replacing it with a determination to build something new. 1 year after Ethan's arrest, Claire and I stood together at the edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was a place we had visited early in our relationship, a spot that had once symbolized hope and possibility. Standing there now, we felt the weight of everything we had endured, the betrayals, the pain, the healing. We didn't speak much, letting the sound of the waves fill the silence between us. Words felt inadequate to capture the complexity of our emotions. But as we stood side by side, I realized that the bond we shared, though battered and bruised, was still intact. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Claire slipped her hand into mine, her grip firm yet gentle. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was a promise not of a flawless future, but of a commitment to try, to see each other, to hear each other, to rebuild. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The journey we had been on was far from what I had imagined, but it had brought us here, to this moment. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful.